Today, I'm joined by Robb Lee, Chief Marketing and Product Strategy Officer at the American Society of Association Executives. Thank you so much for joining us on the Association Marketing Show. It's great to have you.
Oh, my pleasure. I look forward to these conversations. So I'm excited. Great to see you.
Same. Our prep conversation was super enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to the recording and the episode here today. So just to level set, could you please tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background and how you made it into the wonderful world of associations, as I like to call it, and what your role in organization is today?
Sure. Yeah, so I'd first start with saying I've been lucky. I mean, I've traveled a wonderful path, and I've just been really fortunate and have been able to had some really cool experiences. So more specifically, starting the first part of my career, and I won't go through this for the next 10 minutes, I'll keep it short, of course. But, first part of the career was really focused on ad agencies. I was fortunate to start my career at the number one ad agency in the world at the time, and then moved over to PR agencies, so it's still top 5. And then also from there, I went into environmental consulting, but it was a global, environmental consulting firm, or actually global consulting firm. I was working the environmental component of it. And then also on the for-profit side with regards to some major global brands such as Marriott. So I've had a lot of for-profit experience before landing in the association space at ASAE, all of which was focused on advertising, public relations, and branding. And that's exactly what when I stepped into ASAE, it was truly as a branding role to start, quite frankly. So when there was a merger between ASAE and what was called the Center for Association Leadership. So exciting time.
Yeah. And so how long have you been at ASAE now? I know it's been quite a ride, but just for all the listeners.
Yeah, so I've been here for about almost 15 years now. And what's funny is that you get to various points in your career. It's like at least for me, I never went someplace saying that I was going to stay a predetermined amount of time. I always stayed because I enjoyed it, and when I did enjoy it, then it was time to leave. Quite frankly, and I still enjoyed it. I've had a good time, and the job has changed, the organization has changed. What doesn't change is serving the members, and I love that. So yeah, it's been a good fit for me.
Yeah. There's so much I want to dig in on with both like your career as a marketer at ASAE and how your role has changed, kind of like the major chapters of your role. Sure. And also I think that this is a unique episode for us in that everybody knows your organization and is probably affiliated with the organization in one way or another. Maybe there's members or they have participated in certain educational programs or events, virtual or in person in the past. And so that's really nice. But just in case, could you briefly describe what ASAE does, who your members are, and the main kind of services and resources that you provide your members?
Sure. I appreciate the intro. I think, one of the things that I hear from people from people that know us well and those that don't know us so well, honestly, is that if they have any kind of name recognition of ASAE, it's kind of the Association for Associations. So there's always a little private joke, or sometimes a public joke in this case, around the fact that should be our tagline, right? Because that's how people know us. If they haven't heard of us, that's typically what they'll say. So wait a minute, you guys are the Association for Associations. True. So what are we and what do we provide? It's really association management resources at the core and advocacy efforts, on behalf of the association community. And, typically how we talk about it, and I think the role that we play is that an opportunity to, help associations do the work of society in ways that are important to them. And whatever we can do in order to facilitate that, in order to help them become more efficient, in order to, connect with them with the community that allows them to grow and to prosper as it relates to their specific, areas of focus. That's in essence what we do. I mean, that's very simplistic, but that's at the core of it. It's a home. That's the way it feels. It's a home for associations. And so here's a space that you can come and connect with your colleagues in a way that you can reveal, non-competitively, you can reveal whatever happens to be on your mind, and to get some honest and candid feedback through the relationships that you have. And it just continues to kind of mushroom. That's the thing that we've seen year in and year out. And so it's fun to be a part of that.
Yeah. How I've thought about it a couple of times is that you are in the business of serving your members and helping them serve their members, right? Exactly right. So it's kind of a meta position, but it's a wonderful position too. I want to get into some of like what you've seen in the industry, especially in the last year, which has been, a tumultuous year for everybody, but in our case, especially for the association industry. So I'd love to learn kind of what you've seen in the industry and yeah, how you've seen the industry respond and what you've learned about your members and associations more broadly in this time, and how they've evolved to continue to serve their members and be successful as organizations themselves. Anything kind of come to mind as some of the themes that you've seen over the last year?
I think with regard to some of those themes, I mean, what's happened is, it's hard to, I think it's hard, at least it's hard for me. I suspect it's hard for all of us. I mean, it's tough to kind of separate what's happening, professionally for any of us, with regards to what's been happening externally in the environment on a number of different levels. And so, when I think about it that way, there's what I've seen and experienced is that there's been a lot of pain, quite frankly, pain and uncertainty. There have been, unfortunately, like almost all industries out there, people have lost jobs. There has been a sharp decline in revenue for a lot of organizations, and particularly in the areas that they have come to rely on, which has been in many cases the face-to-face meetings. That's been a tremendous challenge, and it's tough, and I'm just honest about it. I mean, we all know that, we all experience it, and those are just the realities. I think what I've seen as part of the response, though, is of course, this incredible resiliency in the association space, this incredible embrace of adaptability and thoughtfulness about not only how to change course, but also to how to change course in a way that is truly as beneficial as it can be for as many people as we can possibly serve. Yeah. And that is sincere. And I've seen that, I've experienced that, I've been a part of that, I've heard it talked about, managing with empathy, making decisions with empathy, extending grace, not only for members, certainly, and stakeholders, but also internally from a management standpoint. These are the kinds of themes that I've seen really kind of rise to the surface, if you will. They were there before, but as we all know, when confronted with, challenging circumstances, there's certain things that tend to bubble up and become more important. And so all those things that I just mentioned, I've seen become a lot more important over time. And I think it's a wonderful thing to see. It's too bad that, it took something like this to, have us. I mean, as I would say, quite frankly, I mean, there's a racial pandemic and there's a biological pandemic, both of which will be with us in various forms, for a long time and have been with us in various forms for, prior to this time. So, I've seen a community that is at times struggling to figure out new answers, but at the same time embracing the opportunity of that change too. And so it's been good in that respect.
Yeah.
The Association Marketing Show is sponsored by Feathr, the digital marketing toolkit for events and associations. Is your organization looking to ramp up its sponsorship strategy in 2021? Our latest ebook takes a close look at all of the ways you can leverage digital sponsorships to make up for lost revenue or create new revenue streams altogether. Get your free copy of How to Generate Digital Sponsorship Revenue in 2021 and more at feathr.co/resources. That's feathr.co/resources.
I resonate with everything that you're saying. That was one of the things that impacted me a lot, genuinely, seeing this whole, pandemic unfold and all of the social issues and challenges that came about in the last year, was how our customers or association professionals responded from that place of empathy and service on the whole. Those were like the driving emotions, and like that was the approach behind even seeking solutions to like revenue challenges for the organization, for example. It was all within this context of empathy and service for the members. And upon reflection, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, because our customers and associations have always been focused on delivering member value and being a resource for members. Like that is literally what they do. But even in the most trying of circumstances, to see that approach still kind of like emerge as the primary one was very, very heartening to me. I remember talking just to customers throughout the last year, and sorry, I hit the mic. One of the things that I've had repeated to me so many times is that, we're not just, yes, we've canceled our annual meeting, and that's been a huge hit for us as an organization, for example, or a whole series of meetings. But our thinking is not just how do we recoup that revenue as quickly as possible. Like yes, that's one of the conversations we're having, is how can we, continue to generate revenue in this time? And that's taken the form of, virtual events and virtual sponsorships and these kinds of things. But the more kind of prominent question has been, how can we continue to deliver as much member value as possible? Because our members, in most cases, are also hurting during this time. And that has to be priority number one. And even if that means, leaving some short-term revenue on the table, but building a deeper bond with our members by serving them in this time of need, that's the thing that we're going to do. And I've heard that time and time and again from people that I've spoken to. And so I'm just really resonating with what you're saying.
Well, but I'm going to share something specific for those that know us and members that know exactly what happened here. For those that don't, I'll share a little insight. And it's good examples of what you just shared and what we've been talking about. So our annual meeting last year, every year it's in August. And last year, of course, it was virtual. And that was the first time. What we were able to do was that we made it free.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not a business model, that anyone can sustain, us included. But, what I'll tell you how it felt, and some were challenged by that, and I understand why, because of the business model aspect. I've been challenged from the standpoint of, okay, what does that do to the sustainability moving forward? And that was challenging for some, folks in the stakeholders, and I understand that. So there's no debate about that. It was a challenge decision. Fortunately, we were in a position that we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what the response was amazing. You would not believe the types of notes and calls we got from people just saying simply what you said or conveying what you said, and that being thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you because my organization has cut back. Thank you because I couldn't afford my membership. Thank you because I certainly couldn't have afforded to engage in something of this nature, given where my organization is financially. Thank you. I can't tell you how good that felt to all of us, and that we could be in a position to offer that. And as you said, meeting members in that moment of need, that's what the game is about. We'll figure out the business piece of it. Right. But if we don't, at the very beginning, meet the needs, then what are we doing? And that was really the goal.
So. Yeah, totally. Yes. And what you've said, maybe not every organization has the ability to kind of to do that. And that's completely understood. Some organizations are on more of a, short-term kind of like budget where they need to recoup revenue as quickly as possible. But for those who are able to, that kind of approach has really, really resonated with their members. And I think even long-term is the best business strategy, and it shouldn't be motivated by that, but that is the case. If you build a bond with your audience, then when the economy, opens back up or industry opens back up, depending on, what industry that you're in, they're going to have that bond and they're going to remember that. And they're going to come back to you when they're ready for more resources and ready for education and ready for the services that you provide, because you created that bond with them in that moment of need. And that's so meaningful that doesn't break easily. I want to talk a little bit about your specific role at ASE, because I know it's changed over time, but today you are the Chief Marketing and Product Strategy Officer at ASE, which is a unique role in that you lead these two super critical components of the association's function, marketing and product strategy. So how did that come about? How did you get into product strategy? And what is the relationship between product strategy and marketing, at least in an ideal sense? And how have you improved that relationship and made that work better? And what can people kind of learn from that?
Well, I think what strikes me, a couple things pop in my mind. One being that the importance, so where this came from is that it's not, I want to be clear that it wasn't as though we weren't thinking about this collectively for some time, right? But over time, there are different needs that can come into the forefront. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, how do we apply a more disciplined approach? And that's how I would characterize this. On my background and training is certainly on the marketing side, marketing and branding, but as a consequence of that, I had to understand product management. And I think a lot of marketers do. And I think it's something that is a tremendous opportunity. When you ask, what's the ideal, what does this mesh point look like, if you will, between marketing and product strategy?
Right, exactly.
That mesh point is all about coordination. It's all about shared knowledge. And I think it's honestly also all about understanding various roles, that people can play in order to, I don't know if there are any football fans out there. I am, so I can use football analogies.
I see your Packers hat back there behind you.
Yes, you see that behind me, right? All right. Wisconsin Packers, yeah. That's where I grew up. But anyway, they talk about complementary football, honestly. So it's like, offense, defense, special teams. And you don't win games unless all three of those components are working together, understanding that there are different and separate components that have to execute in the moment that they are called upon. And that's what you call complementary football. And that's why I call it complementary management as it relates to, product management and the synergy with, marketing. And you've got to understand that. So it's not the same job. And the product management is something that is done up front in order to put marketing in the best possible position to succeed, but understanding that neither of which, could be perfectly executed, in isolation, could fail collectively, unless there's some kind of coordination there. So, I think there are, if I were to talk about like some of the things that I think are most critical. So one of the things that I hear a lot in the association community, I've heard it from almost day one, and that being the challenge with capacity, the challenge with getting rid of things, and understanding an association that's really, really hard. I think part of the solution to that, honestly, is embracing more of a product management perspective where, if you think about the product life cycle and those 4 stages of the product life cycle, you've got innovation on the front end, you've got introduction on the front end, and you have maturity on the back end, right? Well, a lot of products, once they move into this mature phase, there are certain assumptions that go with each of the 4 phases, of course. But the mature phase, as things begin to, in essence, kind of roll off the table, your pipeline are the things that you're introducing that hopefully are not repeating, but actually are complementing and improving something that's rolling off the table. So it should be this kind of closed cycle, closed system. And that kind of thinking and discipline around the product footprint for the organization from an enterprise-wide standpoint, I think is where part of the answer to the capacity lies. Because, I think about it as a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
And, they're always going to be everybody, no matter ASA, anybody. We all have limited resources. We have choices to make in order to make sure that we maximize the resources that we have. And that's an important distinction. So I think that's one aspect. I could spin off on a few others if you like, but that's a key one with regards to that mesh point, understanding the product life cycles and applying that in a way that says, you know what, I'm taking things off the table and I'm putting things on the table. And that's a regular part of the work.
Yeah, that's so helpful, because otherwise it's just like every product exists in perpetuity and demands attention and resources, when actually, if you can acknowledge that there is this life cycle and different products, you can identify which products belong to which life cycle, and therefore what kind of approach they should have, and maybe how their marketing should evolve depending on where they sit in the life cycle of a product, and then kind of manage the offboarding of mature products and the onboarding and rollout of new products. That is a solution to this capacity problem, both on the product and kind of maintenance and production end, just from a product standpoint, product management, but also on the marketing end, because as a product is phased out, that frees up marketing resources as well that are not tied up into maintaining the promotions and the comms around that product, for example.
I love that what you just said about it. It's such an excellent point. Here's an example in sharp relief, as you said. When you have a product that is in that mature phase, there are decreasing returns to scale, right? So in other words, you have to spend more to get less, from a margin standpoint. Okay. Now, you can try to disprove that. At some point, it's going to catch up to you, but there's some efficiencies around it. But nonetheless, that's kind of those are the assumptions that one makes that are proven. Those aren't just assumptions, out of practice. Those are not theoretical assumptions. Those are practical assumptions around this is what happens when products are in the mature phase of life cycle. To your point, when ends up happening, and there's nothing more frustrating to a marketing team than being in the situation of trying to push a whole lot of resources into a product that is slowly declining. Meanwhile, there's pressure to let's upmarket something over here because we're trying to introduce it and get it to land. And the marketing folks will always sit back and say, wait a minute, what are you asking me to do here? You want me to do both, and I can't do both well. Allow me to pull something over here and put it into this bucket. That's the point. And that is something that should be stated out loud. Because I think when it's not stated and spoken to, then there's just an assumption, do it all. And whether it's the product doing it all or the marketing resources doing it all, both of which are the best solution. So that's critical.
That's an amazing point. I'm appreciating this so much. What what advice would you give to, because obviously there's a symbiotic relationship between product teams and marketing teams, whether they have joint leadership in like your case with ASAE or not. Like there's symbiosis no matter what. It's unavoidable, right? The product is determining the product strategy and the budgets and the goals and the timelines, et cetera. And then marketing is responsible for the promotion and helping to hit those goals and the distribution of that product. What would you recommend that marketers kind of, I'm going to use the word demand, but demand is too strong, but like the information that marketers request from their product colleagues such that it sets them up with the best chance to succeed in promoting that product possible? And then on the flip side, what would you suggest to product leaders or product team members in terms of information, context, whatever, to provide, to make sure to proactively provide to their marketing or comms colleagues such that they have the context and the information, et cetera, that they need to, as successfully as possible, as quickly as possible, make those products successful from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, great question. I think, so let's come back to the concept of complementary football and complementary marketing and product management. So how do you define complementary? In this context, how you define it, I think, is that if you're looking at from a marketing standpoint, what do I need to know? Well, one of the things that I'm looking for as marketers, I want to understand how you're assessing demand. I want to understand, are these realistic, goals that are being set? Doesn't mean that I have to set them. I don't think I should, and I don't really need to if I'm operating from a marketing point of view. But I, as well within my rights to say, how did you set them? Because those goals are going to be related to your expectations of what I can get out of marketing. And if those goals, and if you think about products, and there are two components to simplify this, that I see. One is interest, the other is demand. Both of which need to be identified. And what is the solution there? What is the outcome that you seek? So the interest piece of it, typically, and is perfectly fine, is there's some energy around an idea. There's some energy because, let's say you and I had a conversation and we went and had this conversation, shared this idea with a number of other people. You know what? That's great interest. And then we continue to kind of socialize that idea. So now we've got this group of people, maybe a broad group of people that are really excited about this idea. But maybe they just like the idea because we're good at selling it. That's okay. But that's the interest piece of it. The demand piece of it is, okay, Rob, bye. How did you assess demand? How many people do you think are going to buy this product? Right. Where are those people? Who are those people? Are they buying something similar that we're already doing? Is there competition out in the marketplace that makes it either harder or less hard or easier for us to put this into the market for it to be successful? From a marketing point of view, those are things that I want to understand, because that's going to translate to, ultimately, what I will control are the campaign metrics. What you will control are the business metrics, but they both complement each other. Right. They're not independent. Right. So I think it's, if there's a way, it's more a function of how to have that conversation. And, so that's one piece of it. If I flip to the other side, what is the product, manager looking for from a marketing person? I'd say, okay, look, here's my interest, in essence, here's my demand, here are my price points, and hey, what do you think about that? Are you good? Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I think we're kind of covering our bases as best we can. Of course, there's always going to be some uncertainty. But if you're comfortable as a marketing person with how I'm approaching it from a product standpoint, then you're going to embrace more of the marketing in the first place, because you know what? You're not going to be asking questions downstream around whether or not, the price point's a great product, or the price point is too high, and therefore the margins are, the market throws off the margins, whatever however you clear out the variables. But those are important conversations to have, the marriage of which then puts us in a position to, once we get downstream, we're actually looking at the performance from a market standpoint, and not, I think the product management piece was off, or I think that through messaging, we could have been more successful from a marketing perspective, or whatever the tactics we're using. I think that's fundamental to having the fundamental piece of this is having these conversations in the right way. Yeah. So that it's clear, it's not a function of ownership that's obviously baked into it, but it's more a function of sharing the right kind of information, and each of us making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable by asking the questions, and that there are answers to those questions. That will accelerate, back to our product life cycle, that'll accelerate us taking this product from introduction to, growth phase, to, to a steady phase, and then eventually to maturity. It'll help us make that assessment much more quickly, which then keeps the system moving smoothly. When we don't separate those conversations, it gets really complicated and convoluted, and it just gums it up.
That's such good advice. I've experienced that on our end. We're obviously not an association, we make software, but it's a very, very similar situation where we're making software product decisions or service products that we're considering developing or we're working on. And then the marketing team is getting involved at some point in that process, right? And ideally early, because then you can be part of the conversations about like, okay, what's the background behind this product? What's the kind of audience insight or customer insight that led to this product idea? What is some of the early feedback maybe from, people in our audience or existing customers who are helping us to evaluate this product? Who's it for? What's it going to compete against when we release it? How do we stack up against those like main categories of competitors? What are our unique features and attributes? What's the value that we're communicating around this? What's the price point? Et cetera, et cetera. These are all so helpful kind of fundamental understandings to have, such that when it comes to the point to communicate and promote and market that product, we have a really dialed in understanding about all of these core components, and we're not trying to figure it out on the fly or just release an announcement email or what have you and like hope it goes well. It's like we're doing it from a place of actual shared insight. And so I can, even on my end, really resonate with what you're saying. I think that's golden advice.
Well, it's something that we all talk about. It's a function of it's really making some distinction in the conversations that we're having and being clear about, what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to go about doing it is where the key really is. And I think that's something that we all struggle with. And I say we all, meaning I know that we struggle with it. So that's part of the reason that we have this role. But again, the conversations were there. We're trying to create a little bit more discipline around them. So that we can accelerate everything, all the decision making. Process accelerates decision making most often if it's done well. It doesn't slow it down. Sometimes there's a perception that process slows things down. Oftentimes that's more function of I kind of want my hands tied through process. I want to do what I want to be able to do. Yeah. Well, there's some truth to that. Yes, you can do what you want to do, but it's still, you're going to have to vet it. Now, the process needs to make that, something that can be done relatively quickly, so that it's not frustrating, but it doesn't remove the fact that it still needs to be vetted.
Yes, right. That's a great point too. Rob, I had a couple questions about like marketing execution and marketing strategy specifically. One is just top of mind. What are some, recent or relatively recent marketing successes that you've been a part of implementing or that you've seen be implemented at ASAE, whether that's new marketing channels or new programs or tactics? Just any lessons or wins that you've had on the marketing front that the listeners who are, again, primarily association marketers kind of take away and consider for their own marketing?
Sure, a couple things. I mean, and certainly with all due respect and sincerity, it's all of us. So it's absolutely not just Rob doing any of this, clearly. But, what am I proud about? I'm proud about the team and what they have been able to accomplish. And there are a couple things that jumped right to the forefront for me. One of them is that the last two annual meeting campaigns I absolutely loved. And I typically love them all. I come from the creative side anyway, based on my advertising background. But, I'm proud of what we do from an annual meeting concept perspective, because I think it's an interesting product to sell year in and year out. And so, what you're doing is you're trying to look forward, and, it'd be scary for everybody to understand how early we start thinking about the creative concept for annual meeting, because it's more than a few months, let's just put it that way. But doing that effectively means that we are thinking about culturally what's going to be resonant, 10 or 12 months from now. And, those aren't absolutes, it's subjective, right? But it still takes some interpretation and try to kind of get a sense of where will people be, where their head's going to be by the time August rolls around, or when we start marketing, typically in March. So, the last two campaigns, one of which was for 2019, it was the Make Your Mark. I'm sorry, Make Your Mark's 2020. And it was virtual, and we had grand plans for this. It was also our centennial, so we had grand plans for this campaign when it was going to be face-to-face, and we had to shift, obviously, to virtual. But nonetheless, the Make Your Mark was relevant because it was making your mark for in the context of the centennial. It was also making your mark in the context of the association space that you were serving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it worked really well. So that was one of them. We've also, I'm particularly proud of the fact that we have, kind of tippy-toed into marketing automation. That's one that we are still exploring. And I'm proud of the fact that the team has just kind of embraced that and tried to figure out ways that we could apply it in various aspects of our, of our product base, if you will, to test it. It's complicated. It takes some time. It takes a lot of resources, but I'm proud of their work there. The other piece that I'm, particularly happy about is we've been leaning on artificial intelligence, and not across the environment certainly, but again, let's say I take associations now. We did this a couple of years ago, but the information that we're gleaning from that is important because it's allowing us to customize, the content experience for the daily newsletter through associations now. So everybody's getting, X number of stories that everyone gets. Then there's another percentage that everybody's getting based on their behavior. The implications of that have been consistently strong. From the moment we started, the open rates and the click-through rates popped up and they stayed up. That was the point. So, coming back to what we said earlier about, meeting people in their moment from a content standpoint, that's been a good example of that. It's something I'm particularly proud of. The next step will be taking that information and utilizing that in a way that says, Bob, when you come into our space, I know that you've been, you've been, surfacing these types of content articles, this type of subject matter. Now, can I start, kind of combining that with some other pieces, products and services that we have that make sense for you, that are contextual for you, that aren't necessarily contextual for everybody. So, that's the future state, but I'm proud of all. I mean, I can go on because I think the team is just tremendous, and they really are. But yeah, those are a couple of things that pop into my head.
That's so cool. I love that the examples you gave are like run the spectrum from like creative executions to technology implementation. And sometimes it's easy to swing too hard in either direction, where marketing is all about data and technology, or no, marketing is all about the art and the creative touch. And I love that the examples that you gave are examples of both, because both are important. And you showed that in your response. So that's great. Rob, I've loved this. Last couple questions for you, if you don't mind, just kind of quick fire questions before we get you out of here. We always ask, at this stage in your career, if you could go back in time and tell, younger Rob, who's just getting started, either in your career holistically or getting started at ASAE and in the association space, what advice would you give yourself?
What occurs to me is that sometimes I wish I'd maybe have been a little less patient, honestly. So for those that know me well, I'm very impatient, underneath the surface, but that's not how I present, truthfully. And, so it's kind of like this intellectual impatience. I'm always churning things, but that's not, so sometimes reflecting how I talk about things, but more importantly, it's like, I want to push things forward. And so I'm not sure that I would say it's really both. It's actually, there are moments where I wish I'd been less impatient. There are other moments that I probably should have been more patient. And so I think, the future, looking back, I would say, assess the environment, make sure that, there's, you can have the best ideas in the world, and I have some good ideas like everybody does. And some people are really spectacular at it. That's fantastic. But the point of it is that right time, right place. And it's always, I think it's important to understand that context, and that doesn't, remove any frustration in the moment when something doesn't, move forward, but it does say, helps explain why that might be occurring. Even if you don't agree with it, here's why it's occurring. And then it gives you an opportunity to adjust that message, moving forward, and bring that idea back to the forefront. So the thing I'd like to always think about is, I need to say it in a way that, a buyer needs to hear it, which is different than how I might want to say it in the moment.
Right.
And I'll shift that. So that's just something that I've, kind of embraced over the years.
Knowing when to push harder, so to speak, and knowing when to give like room to breathe. It takes tact and experience to kind of to assess that. Cool. And if you had a magic wand and you could solve any problem for yourself professionally, that's not unlimited budget.
Right.
What comes to mind?
What comes to mind, honestly, is that So I had these themes in my head, and because they actually do think about it this way. But what comes to mind simply is that the the separation of roles and the definition of roles, so that we're not all trying to do the same thing in different ways, but rather we are relying on folks to do the things that they have deep expertise in. And then we're pulling up the things, the outcomes of that. And then we're having conversations about the outcomes and how we're going to adjust them, as opposed to conversations about how we're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So it requires a lot of trust. It requires, not only, effective collaboration, which, collaboration is not, us sitting down at a table having a conversation about something, or a group of us. Effective collaboration is all of us creating space for someone else's ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and all of us being willing to say, sometimes publicly in that setting, you know what, make it better. And that's okay, because we're all focused on the outcome. So, that magic wand is a process wand. It's a wand around, let's have some, I like the Socratic method, of processing to a point. And then at some point you have to move that forward, because it can just end up in endless questions.
Right.
So there are a couple of different methodologies that pop into my head that I appreciate. And those are some of the magic wands, because, what's most important, I think, is the problem solving. The problem identification is fairly easy. The problem solving and the way you go about doing that is where it takes some discipline. So that's the magic wand. Let's make sure that we're focused on solving the problem by identifying what it is, which is different than my frustration with it, or how I want to do something different, because I can come up with how to do something different forever.
Yes.
So, that's that. I'm kind of rambling a bit. I'm sorry, but that was that was in my head.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's if I could just attempt to reflect what I'm hearing from you, it's that kind of the, I don't know, collective understanding of the emphasis on focusing on outcomes, which are solutions to problems, and some more of an inherent understanding of a process that we can follow collectively as teams to go about exploring the problem itself, but more importantly, the solutions to those problems, and doing that in a way in which everybody's and every team's unique expertise is kind of properly voiced and given space for and appreciated by the collective group. And then action is created, decisions are made in terms of the next set of solutions to attempt to implement.
No, that's exactly right. And it's funny, because that's something that I was exposed to very early in my career at the ad agencies. The creative process, which is inherently subjective, but absolutely had a very strong and distinct process about how we would come up with creative to engage, millions upon millions of people.
Yeah.
And that was there are elements of that process that reside with me to this day as a consequence, because I've seen that work over and over.
Wow, Rob, it's been really, really enjoyable. I was already anticipating an enjoyable conversation with you, but this has blown my expectations out of the water. I was finding myself wanting to ask further questions and dig deeper on so many different points that you've brought up, that even just scratching the surface was so helpful, but that I have at least personal curiosity about. And I think that our listeners would also appreciate. Maybe we have to do that on a round 2 at some point in the future, though, because I know we got to get you out of here. But thank you so much for the time today. I loved this, and I can't wait to get this out to all the listeners.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's been my pleasure to be here, and it's a great conversation. I love this back and forth. So just an opportunity to be as helpful as possible, and I've learned a lot just from listening to you as well. So thank you for that as well. And we're all going to get better. So that's awesome. The whole point.
Thank you so much again. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.